Monday, December the 3rd. This is the last week of the term. Welcome to macroeconomics and the short rows thereof. How many of you have had microeconomics? 2, 4. Okay. If you had to summarize what you learned in microeconomics in 1 or 2 sentences, what would you tell me? Here's your chance to shine. What is micro about?
How do it works for single businesses and industry?
How a free market economy operates, in theory, for an individual or a business. And the quest of the business is to what? What's the goal of business? Profit maximization. What's the goal of the individual? Utility maximization, to maximize our enjoyment, happiness, satisfaction, whatever. If you took a traditional microeconomics principles course, that course used to be called in some places price theory, it focused very much on the operation of a free market, and it typically took you through supply and demand. You remember all that, moving the supply curves and the demand curves and finding the equilibrium price and output. And then it took you into maybe things like elasticities and how to calculate profit. But usually the latter part of the course is focused on what we call market structure. And market structure is basically a discussion on competition. Some markets are very competitive and some are not. They usually show you 4 types of market structures. They show you perfect competition. Let's spell it out here so we don't forget. Probably went off the board. Yeah. Perfect competition, monopolistic competition, which is not monopoly, it's lots of small firms competing. Then they discuss oligopoly, briefly usually, and then pure monopoly, a single seller of a product or service. Now what happens in micro, and probably more frequently people suggest you take micro before you take macro, so you understand all this supply and demand stuff. What happens when you get into supply and demand, the first part, they say, now if the supply curve shifts to the right, here's what happens. And if the demand curve shifts to the right or the left, here's what happens. And in that discussion, they gloss over how long does that take to occur. If the demand for pizza increases, we expect the price of pizza to go up, and we expect people to be buying more pizza. That will be a result of the increased demand. But how long would that take? For example, suppose you read in the paper today that pizza will increase your longevity by 20 years. Add 20 years to your expected life. What would happen to pizza? The demand for it would increase. We would start wanting to buy more of it. What would happen to the sellers? They'd be selling the hell out of pizza. And as they started finding that they were running out of the ability to satisfy all that demand, they tend to raise price. As they find that they need to buy more and more tomatoes and green peppers and onions and whatever, those prices start going up, so they raise their prices. And so we should expect that if you read that in the newspaper, that over some period of time, people would both buy more pizza, and as a result, they would push the price up and increase the number of pizzas sold. It's a really clean, elegant, I like the word elegant theory of how the market works. And the market forces are working like that. But what they leave out in the micro course is how long does that take to happen? How long would it be before pizza prices went from an average of $10 to $15? We didn't talk about that. Okay. Exactly how much more pizza will be sold? We don't know. We'd have to look at the supply curve and see what the slope of the supply curve is. And there are a lot of things that are left out. And we ran into part of that in this course. Do you remember that? When did we run into that? Remember the classical theory? Aggregate demand was going to decrease. There was going to be massive unemployment. As a result, wages were going to fall, prices were going to fall, sales were going to increase. We're going to go back to full employment equilibrium. Remember that? How long was that going to take? If you looked at the classical model, they didn't talk too much about how long it would happen. They said it's an inevitability. And the assumption many made was, well, it would happen fairly quickly. And then what did Keynes say? They were sticky down. Prices and wages were sticky down. You had a decrease in purchasing power, so you had the fallacy of composition. And so when we look at the supply and demand models, the way they're typically presented in a micro course, it's very classical. What you and I know is classical economics, a free market operating without any regulation, supervision, etc. And unfortunately, most people who go out of microeconomics assume that's the way the world works. And it's not. Are those forces at work? Yes. Are we moving in those directions of what they told us would happen? Yes. But because we don't know, A, how long it's going to take, or B, what else is happening while that adjustment process occurs, the conclusions you get from this are not very dependable. In particular, they start with a perfectly competitive market. That's what we would call a free market. No government interference, okay? And they build this model of how supply and demand works and how prices change and businesses adjust to it. The problem with the model of perfect competition, and this is what free markets are based on, the problem is it has never existed. There are always complications in the market, delays, changes in this or that or the other. When your basic model to which you compare everything else doesn't even exist, and you build policies based on the assumption that it does, you sometimes get some pretty rude awakenings. You get some real inconsistencies between what you thought would happen and what did happen, or how long it would take and how long it did take. So my first kind of warning to you is, if you're going to take microeconomics, recognize all this is good knowledge to have. You understand the big forces at work out there. But don't use this as a predictive model. Don't try to predict the future based on this, because it is too far removed from reality and too far based on theory. It's a beautiful, elegant theory. It's very powerful, but it happens over such a longer run and in a vacuum of other considerations. That's the big point. A vacuum of other considerations that if you keep relying on this, you get into trouble. Now, go with me to stagflation. Remember stagflation? What was stagflation? Unemployment and rising inflation. That took us through the 70s. What happened to end stagflation? Say again. Who was the new head of the Fed? The Volcker Fed came in, tightened down the growth of the money supply, drove interest rates through the ceiling, created a severe recession. But that reduced aggregate demand down to where we did recover in a couple of years and got back down to a lower rate of inflation and closer to full employment. That was, let's say, 85, 86. For the next 15 years, 20 years, it was kind of back and forth. We had some good times, some bad times, some good times, some bad times. What happened in 2000, or starting around the year 2000? What did people start buying a lot of? Houses. Houses. And as a result, housing prices began to escalate. And people were buying houses not as an investment, but as a speculative purchase. What does that mean?
In theory that the market's going to stay good, so they buy it low and try to sell high.
The theory that there's a bigger fool than me out there who will pay more for this house after I own it. And this is the important part. This continues through the early 2000s up until about, what do we say, 2006. 2000, yeah, parts of 2007. Housing prices went crazy. The chairperson of the Fed at that time was Alan Greenspan. Alan Greenspan is a staunch defender of free market capitalism. And he was convinced that even though housing prices were extremely high, the market would eventually adjust for that, just like it always does. When prices get bid too high, people pull out and it comes back down. And so he did nothing to interfere. But by 2007, prices didn't adjust down. What happened? Go ahead. For a variety of reasons, we had substandard mortgages being given out. We had a speculative price bubble, that the prices were no longer in any way related to the intrinsic value of the asset. And then on a large scale, people began to say, no, I'm not going to pay that much for it. And the bubble burst, and the prices plummeted. And we got into what we now call the Great Recession, the worst recession since the 1930s. In describing this after the fact, Greenspan, after he's chair of the Fed and has stepped down, admits, he says, I relied too much on the market mechanism to make that reasonable gradual adjustment. I didn't see it coming. And this to me is one of the great examples of over-relying on a market for competition where competition didn't really exist. Okay? There's another one going on out there today. In the United States, we like to claim we're a free market capitalist society, and in many regards we are, particularly for very small businesses. But look at the pharmaceutical industry, and then look at the pharmaceutical industry in China. In China, they have a degree of capitalism there, okay? But we tend to refer to it as state capitalism, where the government of China tends to identify particular businesses, industries, and say, we're going to help you, because you growing would be good for all of us. And so the Chinese government has subsidized the growth of Chinese pharmaceutical firms to where they can produce huge quantities at very, very low prices because the costs are subsidized. And they have gone out into the both prescription and over-the-counter medications and have just driven people out of business. And once they drive people out, other competitors out of business, what do? They raise the price by as much as 700%. And how do you respond to that if you're a capitalist country like the United States, when you're fighting against state-sponsored, supported capitalism, if you will, from China? And the real danger is what? Suppose we have a medication that's being made that China has now driven all competitors out of the market, has raised the price, and now we have a pandemic where we need this medication to save lives. What is it in China's power to do? Put the price wherever they think they can make the most money, and by the way, that would mean a much higher price, because there would be a tremendous increase in demand. People would literally be selling their homes, if you like to see pictures, sell your home to save your child. Okay? So as we look both internally in an economy, but then externally in a global sense of different types of structures competing against one another, there are some problems and issues that have to be worked out. You could construct an argument that says government subsidy of the pharmaceutical industry in the United States should be part of our defense posture to defend ourselves against that kind of difficulty overseas. I don't know how far you want to go with that, but I can see that eventually coming up. So what we're doing, really just for this last couple of classes, is I've given you some articles to read that I hope make you think about well beyond just the basic macro you and I have talked about in terms of Keynes and classical and unemployment and inflation. What are some of the issues that are going out there? And let's see what's happened. By the way, in my micro class, I spend the last 2 weeks of the course basically going back and explaining why this is not the whole story. That capitalism is tremendously good, but it has some other problems. And you and I need to be aware of them. I didn't used to do that in micro because I didn't really see it as terribly important. As the years go by, I find myself looking around and being uncomfortable with the the decrease in what I perceive to be the level of competition and the level of distortion in our economy. So you're going to get part of that here in macro. One of the articles I asked you to read is called Stiglitz on Friedman, or something to that effect. And it talks about Joseph Stiglitz and his remarks about the thinking and power, if you will, of Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman is the name that most people bring to mind when they think of free markets and capitalism. One of his very well-known books was called Free to Choose, in which he and his wife made quite a defense using examples of how competition and free markets are better in the long run for everybody, not just the owners of the businesses, but for you and I as customers. Friedman was an advocate of another type of competition. He thought competition in education would be good. That what we would do is pay our taxes into the school board, and then the school board would send us back a voucher. And you could take that voucher and take it to any school in the county and enroll your kid there. What would that do to the schools?
Force them to be better.
If you don't have enough enrollment in your school when school starts in August, 20 of you don't have a job. Okay? The principal, kind of like the owner of a business, fired. If you were a principal of an elementary school in that kind of environment, how would you spend your summers?
Making your school seem really good.
I'd be hiring myself a public relations specialist. I'd be over at the university getting some student interns. I'd have my faculty on campus painting classrooms, painting buildings, cleaning up, because we've got to look really triple sharp somewhere about the 1st of August when people start making decisions on where to enroll their kids. I got to make sure we get news coverage. I got to make sure I highlight my best teachers, the performance of my best student. What does that sound like?
Communism.
No, to me it sounds like a perfect, it sounds like businesses competing with each other. And they're competing with each other to give parents what they want. And there are some, I think, some really positive attributes to that sort of suggestion. That schools, if they were in competition with one another, would have to raise their standards. Frankly, I'm not sure that wouldn't be a better system than this damn no child left behind, let's teach to the state exam. That doesn't seem to be doing very well. The problem, of course, is what do you do when 5 out of your 6 schools get fully enrolled or over-enrolled? What do you do with the 6th school?
Shut it down.
But where do you put your students? Because now you don't have enough seats anywhere.
Put your bad students
Say again.
Put your bad students
But then it becomes like a ghetto kind of thing.
It becomes like a ghetto sort of school. You're right. So there, again, a competitive suggestion with some positive attributes, but also some worrying aspects that we would have to consider. Okay? Well, Friedman, for background, he's awarded the Nobel Prize in economics in 1976. What was going on in 1976?
Great Recession.
Stagflation. We're right in the middle of it. It's going to hell. And Friedman's one of the ones coming out saying the big reason for your recession is the Fed's increased the money supply too much. Remember, that's always their argument. You remember that? MV equals PQ, right? What causes inflation? Too much money. Because this is always at full employment and this never changes, or changes very, very slowly. So Friedman's agitating this way. When did Volcker take over the Fed? 79. And we began to follow these policies. And so if you think of a pendulum swinging, over here is Friedman, classical. And we swing strongly that way with his Nobel Prize, the growth of monetarism, Volcker taking over the Fed, and the classical view becomes dominant in the 70s, and it remains there because what happened in 1980? Reagan was elected, who was also grounded in classical economics. And so we saw deregulation, tax cuts, etc. Okay, so far. The pendulum began to swing back the other way. Any idea why?
Was that a recession in 1981?
There was a severe recession in 81 and 82. But we still, I mean, even the recently passed George Bush 41, even he succeeded Reagan, and we had 4 more years of mostly classical arguments and points of view. And then we saw Clinton come along. Okay? Clinton is elected in 92. Did we see a return back over to the Keynesian school of thought and what we'd call neo-Keynesian sort of economic policies? Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. He tried some, but he didn't control Congress. And so my view is that from the 90s on up to the 2000s, with the 2000 we saw George Bush the second, if you will, elected, and by 2004, very strong Republican control of the Congress, and they are primarily free market, pro-business thinking, and we stayed there. So in a sense, we've had 40 years of seeing how the classical system worked. And it's given us some value, and it's given us some costs. One of the costs, and not solely because of these policies, but also changes in the world, one of these big costs has been the erosion of employment in the United States. As so many of our industrialized manufacturing type jobs moved overseas, that element of society became disenfranchised, if you will. They were no longer willing and happy participants in the economic game of the United States. They couldn't earn the money. They became very dissatisfied and kind of back and forth on who they were going to vote for. And then I think Trump is the example of someone who at least looked at them and said, I share your pain, I'm going to help you. And we can debate how much help he's given them, but at least he seems to have recognized this was a part of America that has been neglected as a result of, in some large part, this free market orientation. Because free market says what? If you've got a plant in Philadelphia where you're having to pay your workers $10 an hour, but you can move it over to China where you can pay them $1 an hour, you move. And the devil be damned to the costs, because now you're making more profit, etc. So this article on Stiglitz and Friedman says this free market capitalistic approach had some weaknesses, could we call it, that have led to a very unequal system in the country today. Stiglitz, by the way, receives his Nobel Prize in 2001. And I hope you will continue to remember those names and perhaps read a bit on them when you see it come up. And Stiglitz comes out with, I think, a fairly good article here summarizing the criticisms of what's happened for the last 40 years.
Are the costs being different with like if you were to make the same product in China cheaper? Is that why Trump was increasing tariffs on China?
I'm not sure why Trump is doing what he's doing. I think part of it is very, very legitimate. China does 2 things that really punishes developed countries. It says, if you want to open up your company in our country, you must share with us all of your technology. Well, some of that's, patented, private, secret, and that's our key to success. And if the only way we can get into this huge market of Chinese consumers is to give away our technology, it's going to come back and bite us. The second thing is, what else do we know about China?
They're reducing tariffs.
Say again?
They're reducing tariffs currently.
Well, they're talking about it.
Automobiles.
Yeah. But what the big thing I was thinking of, China is notorious for intellectual property theft. Okay? They will steal stuff that in the United States we put them in jail for. They will copy it, reproduce it at a lower price. I think for Trump, I believe some of this, and for a lot of other folks, Republicans and Democrats, these tariffs and this trade war with China is about what we call trying to level the playing field, get them to play more by the rules that we play by. They've passed a 90-day truce on increasing the tariffs. We've increased tariffs on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods with a 10% tariff. We were going to go to a 25% tariff, but they agreed just this week to delay that for 90 days, and maybe they can make some progress on some of these other issues that will prevent that sort of trade war, which again, is going to be very painful for both sides.
How big is the market for like American goods in China?
Well,
How many consumers in China are there for American goods?
there's a whole lot more consumers there than there are here. They don't enjoy as much income as we do here. And they have some different needs. There are industries within the United States that can produce goods that would sell very well there. The first one that comes to my mind is software. Cell phones, maybe, I don't know. We talk about American cars. Well, most of our cars we build for China, we build over there. And we got to build different cars than we build here. Harley Davidson. Guess what happened when Harley Davidson tried to go into China? The average Chinese citizen is about 5 foot 4 inches tall. Let me see you boss that Harley around when you're that big. So there's a huge market that if we made some adaptations, we could probably do pretty well in if we could compete on a level playing field. If the government wasn't subsidizing their businesses and if they weren't taxing our imports. So that, again, I think is part of the background behind this negotiation we're in now. I'm not optimistic about where it goes, but let's wait and see. I would be glad to sing Trump's praises if he achieves that better playing field through his at least threat of tariffs, et cetera. We'll see. Stiglitz's article basically comes across, and I will tell you, I have gone through this a little bit more today and highlighted some other stuff and circled some stuff, and I'm going to repost the article. When you look at these articles on Canvas, let me see if I can get this to work. How about that? There's Joseph Stiglitz. Yellow is my first level of highlighting. Here's some background. Here's some important background. Green is a higher level, kind of a summary point. And then the blue highlight is, whoa, damn, look at this. So I've tried to take part of the reading challenge out of this. Go down here in the beginning. Friedman said in a free market, a public company exists solely to serve shareholders. I don't know if I mentioned this in this class or not. I used to teach for Nova Southeastern University on an adjunct basis, and I taught in their bachelor's degree program in business, and I taught finance and accounting and marketing and management and strategy, and then they gave me a course called Business, Government, and Social Responsibility. Why would we be wanting to teach business students about social responsibility? Because prior to Friedman, during what I have called the Camelot era, we at least gave voice to, and many times did it in practice, talked about businesses' responsibility to the various stakeholders in their world. Their responsibility to customers, their responsibilities to employees, their responsibilities to their society, their community, their responsibilities to whoever, their suppliers. You suppose that course is taught anymore? I haven't found it. If I can ever find my old textbook, I'm gonna keep it as an antique. Because Friedman is the one that gave voice to the idea that a business has one reason to exist, and that's to make a profit for its shareholders. And if it does that the right way, all the other areas, all the other stakeholders will benefit. And that was part of what he was preaching in the 70s. I started teaching for them in the 80s, and they hadn't quite changed the textbooks for a few years. And so for a while, anyway, we still taught business students that as a business, you have a responsibility, not simply to your shareholders, but also to the environment, to the society, to your workers, etc. So we go back. Stiglitz says, in a free market, a public company exists solely to serve shareholders. That's Friedman's argument. Stiglitz argues there is a wealth of proof that these free market conditions cannot exist. So he makes a pretty strong statement there. And then again, go over to page 2 over here, highlighted in green in big print. The invisible hand can exist, just not in the real world. What does he mean? What is the invisible hand?
It's like if I sell you something cheaper than somebody else sells you something of the same quality, both of them, then you're going to come to me. You're not going to go to them.
And what will that do to the company that had the higher price?
And they'll go away.
They'll either have to reduce their price, go out of business, or improve their quality. That was that invisible hand that regulated competition. That if you started to try to produce a poor quality product, we would learn about it, we wouldn't buy it. If you started to raise your prices, we would learn about it, we wouldn't buy it. That's the invisible hand. That's the phrase from Adam Smith in his book. The great invisible hand regulating competition. And now Stiglitz comes out and says it can exist, but not in the real world. So please take a look at what he's got there. As you go through here, I've got a little shaded in box here in kind of light brown. Those are my comments, some of my questions. You might want to look at those as you're studying for the exam. Let me see if I can get back to, or get down to what I was doing earlier. No, I guess I was maybe elsewhere. Again, you may remember we called the free market neoclassical school the Chicago school. So there's some more comments in there. Notice the headline here, Friedman wins. Friedman's views on the neoclassical free market system became dominant and remained dominant, I would guess, for an easy 40 years. But today things are somewhat changing. And so we're going to go from that to this one, I think one. Let me see. Yeah. This is again Stiglitz. And now he's going to say, not only did we go too far with the classical system, now we got a real problem in this country, particularly as evidenced by the inequality of income, the very rich and the very, very poor. And so this is the one I meant to tell you I have re-highlighted. I put some ellipses around different things that are kind of important. And I would ask you to pay particular attention to this article for the 4th exam. He talks about what has caused this great inequality in America. And we just discussed part of that, right? Jobs went overseas. A lot of people used to making $60,000 a year, couldn't find a job making $30,000 a year. So we got some of that going on. But what Stiglitz begins to point out is when you have a lack of regulation, and then you combine it with other institutional ideas. Think about this. If you are a wealthy person, what are the chances your children will go to the best quality school? Very high. If you are not a wealthy person, what are the chances that kid will go to a wealthy, highly thought of school? Not as high. Okay, you can disagree with some of that, but that is, for the most part, true. What happens after 3 generations of that? I think that's very well said. Yeah, you got a lot of people who have inherited wealth, some of whom are capable and some who are not, but they are now in control of a large quantity of resources, and these people, regardless of how capable or not, still have a smaller percentage of the total pie. Over time, and there's a little brown rectangle in here I want you to look at with me. See if I can find it again. No, it's on another article. What's going to happen over time if this kind of trend continues? You have a growing number of people staying down in the low income area and a relatively small group of people getting richer and richer. What's that going to lead to in the long run?
Isn't it going to make that gap between rich and poor bigger over time?
It's going to grow, And it's going to become even more difficult to be socially mobile, to be able to be born in low income and move up into middle class or higher, because of a number of institutional factors. I mean, can you imagine that you come from Opelousas, Louisiana, where you went to school in a little 200-person school, and now you got into Harvard?
That's impossible. I've been to that city. It's just not possible.
You've been to Opelousas? There is a school in Louisiana that was predominantly very, very poor, that they lied like hell about all their students, and they got them into some of the best universities. It's finally coming back to bite them in the butt. But I agree with you. If you've ever been to Opelousas, there is no hope. But even if you manage to get into school at Harvard, how well equipped are you academically, intellectually, and socially to prosper in that environment? Are you probably going to dress funny compared to the rest of them from day one? And what happened? What do we do? I mean, what happens when you all go to a campus and you live there and you've got 5,000 people in the student body? What happens with the freshman class every year? If they don't know how to dress, they don't know how to talk, they don't know how to comport themselves, what happens to them? They get ostracized by everybody. Do they get asked to pledge for a fraternity or a sorority? No. Do they get invited to join this group or that group? No. And so the longer that, so what's everybody as a freshman in college, assuming you go away, you live on campus, what does everybody try to do?
Socialized.
Say again.
Socialized.
Fit in. And how do we do that? We go to school, and if we're smart, we go there, we get there a year early. And we just drive around campus and look and see the way people dress. We sit in restaurants and we hear the way they talk, and we learn how to blend in. And so then when we go there our freshman year, we've got our wardrobe, we've worked on our speech, maybe we got a chance. But instead, can you spot a freshman on campus in a world like that? Oh yeah, they stand out like crazy. Yeah. I remember my freshman year, my senior year of high school, and I went to school my last year out in Texas. Very strong, rural, conservative Bible Belt. And two students one day came to school without socks on. They sent them home. There were no dances allowed on our campus because dancing was bad. So I get to Florida as a freshman, coming from that background, and what's the first thing I see? Ain't nobody wearing socks. And I'm thinking, well, damn, I got to get rid of these socks. And I can remember taking my socks off and just walking around in my loafers, and by the time I got back to my car, my feet were bleeding. But I was going to fit in. And that's what we go through. And if you don't blend in, you do get ostracized, and you do get set behind. Now, this is just a simple social discussion. How well are you going to be prepared academically, intellectually? What's your background? How well read are you even before you finish high school? And now, do that over 3 generations. These kids, these kids. The gap doesn't, not just income, not just wealth, the gap socially grows wider. It's a very difficult thing to overcome. Anyway, when you get into this one, you can see the bold and the skinny ellipses up here. That's where I found kind of some good summary. And then when I found something really good, I tended to make the print a little larger, okay? And this is one comment I wanted to share with you and get your read on it. Inequality leads to weak aggregate demand. The reason is easy to understand. Those at the bottom spend a larger fraction of their income than those at the top. How would we say that in the language we've used in this course? The MPC of the lower income crowd is what? Much higher, okay? Which means those who are accumulating wealth have a greater marginal propensity to save. And so what's been going on, and I think this is the one, I'm not sure. We've seen a savings glut in society. We've seen wealthy people with lots of money and saving it, Other people who could have spent it and stimulated the economy don't have it to spend, and so the economy is dragged down that way. What I was trying to lead you to in terms of what happens if this split continues, these are your customers for your business. And if their incomes are not growing, what's the future for your business? Much more limited, much more limited. Okay? So these, again, I can't cover all of this, but if you'll go back and read this article with emphasis on some of the things, here's another one where I've written the print a little larger. I like this one down here. There is a growing global consensus that GDP does not provide a good measure of overall economic performance. What does? Sustainable growth and whether more citizens see better standards of living. So again, all these articles are for your reading, and I can promise you that this evening, preferably before a martini, I will be going back to them and pulling some questions out on them. Okay? Now, there's a couple more I can chat about up here, but have you got anything, have you read any of these? Have you had any thoughts or questions about any of them? Anybody? Because this is kind of the cherry on top at the end of macroeconomics. Yes, ma'am.
You said you were going to repost them.
I'm going to repost this article because I have marked it up a little bit more thoroughly. Nothing's coming up yet.
This exam is based off of Connect, right?
I'm sorry?
Is this exam based off of Connect or like you throw?
The material from the text is from Connect, but then the material that I tend to think of as my material is on the videos of class.
So it'll be like the first two exams.
Yes, yes, very much. Good. Nick Hanauer. Interesting article. Multimillionaire, whatever. My little question in the brown box is the one I just posed to you. What do they mean about a death spiral in the shrinking of spending in the economy? You lose your markets, you lose your businesses. Nick Hanauer is a very wealthy individual who makes these kinds of comments. Trickle-down economics is a lie, and people who subscribe to it are either lying or confused. Well, that's strong enough it should get your attention. He helped fund and develop strategy for the $15 minimum wage in Seattle that was approved 3 years ago. Down here, how are they now? And he says basically $15 a wage higher cost to businesses was also $15 an hour increase, a great increase in income. And so you had offsetting effects that, at least in his analysis, most businesses are better off because they have more and wealthier customers. And him being rich, I thought, interesting to hear him take that particular point of
Are
view.
they actually?
I think it depends on who you talk to.
When you say that, what do you mean?
I don't know any other study that has looked at Seattle and said, oh, total revenue for the restaurant industry has increased by 7% or 12% or anything like that. I'm just saying that this is the one that I saw that because I've tracked Hanauer for a while, I kind of respect what he had to say. I'm not telling you that these articles are all the complete truth. What I'm trying to do in doing this goes back to the microeconomics course. Too often in the college classroom teaching principles of economics, we teach you the same crap we were taught. And it's dry, it's boring, and it's theoretical. In micro, the theory is misleading because it overlooks some pretty important things. In macro, the theory is at least incomplete. Classical economics is not a full statement of what's going on. Keynesian economics is not a full statement of what is going on. Supply side economics, remember Reaganomics? That proved not to be the solution either, but it does have some good elements. And so what I try to do the last week or two of every term is to say, okay, we taught you all this stuff, now it's a lie. Okay? Understand that it's not the complete truth. That's why these articles, again, to me, are, okay, now you've seen the way the theory is built. Let's look and see what's going on in the real world. All right, what else? Has anybody read any of these articles? A few? Look at that. The screen was flashing real light. Let's see here. Here's one. How supply became a dirty word in economics. This fellow, Noah Smith, Noah writes for Bloomberg. I think Bloomberg is one of the best publications out there, pretty center of the road. And I find Noah Smith in particular, I enjoy a lot of what he has to say. Supply side economics. I started work at Santa Fe in 1980, the same year we elected Reagan. And to me, it sounded like the best thing since canned beer. And I voted for Reagan twice. And it took me about 10 years to reach the determination, based on everything I watched and read, that the supply side experiment by Reagan was a mixed success / failure. That it improved life for a lot of the wealthy people and for businesses and for some employees, but that a lot of other employees didn't see much gain to it in terms of better jobs, better paying jobs, etc. And that's kind of the theme that Stiglitz comes through with, is that this whole classical view and the supply side view has got some real strong benefits, but it's got some other stuff that the models don't tell you about, like income inequality, like lingering recessions. All right, I'll stop with the articles for now, but remember that Wednesday, last shot. So get a chance, look through them, see if you see anything that is, not particularly clear. At least read the highlighting, right? And then the exam opens when? Wednesday also, and closes? It closes Sunday. I posted a new announcement. The exam will be open through Sunday. Okay? Weekend, you have to take it at the library. The library is open from 2 to 6. And they won't let you start anytime after 4 o'clock. Yeah, they want you to have at least 2 hours in front of you. And now, allied with that thought, there has been some difficulty with some students at the lab putting in the password and getting it to open. So allow yourself time for some glitches just in case. If you have problems like that and they materially affect your performance on the exam, in your opinion, email me immediately. Tell me what's going on. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
What happens on the day of the final, like the one that is scheduled?
Ain't no such thing.
Nothing, we just
Yeah.
don't even.
Read the announcement. The announcement says, contrary to the Santa Fe schedule, and even contrary to the course schedule I gave you, here is the exam date.
Yeah, but we don't do nothing.
That's it. Exam 4, and you're free to be.
The email you immediately thing,
Hmm?
I didn't meant to do that. It like reset my whole exam.
Did it?
Yeah, because it timed out on an answer, and then I had to restart from the beginning
When was this?
for this last exam.
So Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday?
Yes, and then, yeah, Wednesday.
They were having problems with connecting the entire
Yeah,
lab.
they were like, we
Yeah, I know.
have to email your professor. I was like, let's try again. I don't have time for this. And then it just restarted the whole exam. And I was like,
Well, I have called and written the rep. She says she's sent it to their troubleshooters. And if you, in your mind, it significantly affects your grade, you let me know. We'll figure something out. Even if you have to sit down and do it on paper exam. One other thing. You are asked to evaluate this course and me, right? On eStaff, right? Or eSanta Fe for you guys. Please do that. Do it for all your courses. But in my case, and share this with your friends, please, I'm responsible for hiring all the economics faculty. And I need to know what their students say they are doing or not doing. And I need information on those evaluations. So please fill them out. Okay? You can do it on your phone. Anything else? We've got a few minutes of slack time today, and I've talked enough to bore you to death. What's on your mind?
That song, Baby It's Cold Outside, got banned in Ohio.
I saw that.
Bunch
You
of
ever heard the song Baby It's Cold Outside?
They said that it
Go examine the lyrics.
raping girls.
Examine the lyrics.
I've heard that before.
Yeah,
about
but
how
like
it's,
the context back then was a lot different than.
It was, absolutely. And personally, I'm very sad they're banning it. But I can see why some people are offended by it.
And
Also,
Rudolph is
Rudolph?
banned?
Rudolph.
it's
Why?
because there's bullying, like, in the movie and stuff like that.
Oh, really?
Like, when the dad is yelling at Rudolph, people are like, he's verbally abusing Rudolph, like,
Well,
it's
that's getting a
stupid.
little ridiculous.
Yeah.
You can't even enjoy Christmas.
No, it's so sensitive.
So it's like the holiday everybody looks forward to all year. It's Christmas time because you get to put on sweaters, you get to listen to music. No,
Now
you
you
can't
can't
even listen to
listen.
them.
Ohio can't listen to music because nobody wants to
You
watch
can't do
Rudolph.
it. Balsam fir.
Yeah, balsam first.
Don't you
What's
dare,
that?
I said, don't you dare call it a Christmas tree.
No, it's a Boston fir now.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that. I am so far out of being politically correct, I think. You know, I just-
It's crazy out there. Let alone.
No, it's cold out there.
Don't say that. I
Don't say Merry Christmas either.
Yeah. I might get slapped and put in jail one of the two of them.
Is happy holidays now?
Yeah.
Happy holidays, balsam firs.
Jeez.
And you gotta put star on the top. You gotta put a star on your tree now. You can't put an angel up there because,
Well, maybe in public, but you can put any damn thing you want up at home, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to sacrifice a chicken at home for Christmas, that's okay.
well,
You're right.
Yeah.
We sacrifice a
Aren't
turkey.
Christmas trees secular anyway? They don't really,
I'm sorry?
They're not really tied to like
What is?
Christmas trees. They're not. They're,
Oh, if you examine the history of Christmas trees, they come from paganism.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the point is well made that don't go to an extreme here, right?
Yeah.
well, you know,
So
it's
Rudolph is what
Ohio.
really
They don't have
offends me.
summer
That's a
up
really-
there.
that's a
They
stretch.
don't really know what joy is in Ohio. All they see is clouds and snow for 75% of the year. They hate their lives.
Wow.
But that's how it is in Michigan too. I used to
Really?
live up there. Oh my gosh. You would think that they just all wanted to end it. I'm serious.
I can remember stationed in Germany for 3 years. It seemed like from somewhere around late September until 1st of May at least, it was just gray skies and snow and, yeah. And they have there's a, what is it? Something affective disorder of people who go for prolonged times without sunlight. Very common up in Alaska and places like
Yeah,
that.
they become Yankees.
Seasonal affective disorder, SAD.
Yeah.
And the rate of depression and suicide is much elevated. And or they become Yankees.
I went to a beta conference over the summer, and there was a girl from Alaska there, and it was during the week of 4th of July, and she had never seen fireworks at night because it's daytime there during 4th of July.
That's right.
And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah,
She was kind of weird though,
yeah, we
and she wanted to be my best friend the whole week.
oh, good for you. How is she weird?
I felt like she didn't know how to just like sit around and relax because we were all wearing shorts and stuff. And she's like, I've never worn shorts before. Like, I mean, I have, but like,
Not in public.
not
you
in
know.
public. Yeah, like around my house, I've worn shorts, and she just looked uncomfortable the entire time.
We're back to that freshman going away to college, you know?
She's from where?
She's in
Alaska.
Alaska.
I had a friend from Alaska too. He was a strange character. He wore a beaver hat all the time. It was
Well,
kind of different.
Sounds like you gave her.
causation or correlation? Do they become weird as a result of going up there?
Yeah.
Or
I don't know.
I think it's because like,
were they weird to begin with and that's why they went up there?
well, she was homeschooled, and like they
That's-
had beta, but it was because they like met up with other homeschool people and they had a beta club. But like she didn't have a public school or anything like that where she lived. It was like 30 miles to get groceries and stuff like that. So
Oh, yeah.
it was literally her grandma, her brother, and her 2 cousins. That was it.
That's your
I don't know.
social
If, I
circle.
don't know if you saw on the news there was that big earthquake in
Yeah,
Alaska.
Okay, so my buddy, his painting, he lives up in Alaska. He used to go to school here. His painting fell on him. during the earthquake. Yeah, it was great. Like the size of this table.
Oh, God. Ruined a lot of work there.
He,
Go ahead.
he didn't care about getting hit. He cared about the pain.
Yeah.
They were, it was on the news, and I was like, just seeing all the people, I like kind of had like a stereotype that like all Alaskans are kind of out there a bit, and I was like, oh, they all look like normal people just going about their business. But then they showed these people were treating like all the cracks like an amusement park, like they were climbing in and out of the roads that were all
Yeah.
messed up. And
There's not a hell of a lot
they were
to do up there
sliding-
sometimes. Come
sliding
on.
down the road. And
You know, the
stuff.
road's uneven, let's crawl up that, you know. We were up there summer last year. We flew into Fairbanks at 3 in the morning in bright sunlight, and this is in May, June. And the people we met were exceedingly friendly and very personable. And a couple of our guides, this one guy, just some amazing stories and just so easy to listen to and fun to be around. And then he'd start telling us about what it was like in the winter. You're like, whoa, damn. No, thank you. You get on the ferry, which runs at different stops. It's like a 4-day trip down here. He says that's what we did for a long weekend. And then when we came back, we'd buy $500 worth of pizzas and let our friends know we were coming in, and we'd have a huge pizza party right there when we stepped off. Thinking, whole different world.
And one thing that caught me off guard about her is that she didn't, I don't know, it was like when you were talking to someone else, she would come up to you if she wanted to say something and put her arm right here, and that was how she let you know that she wanted to interject something. She wouldn't just interject, she would wait for you to stop, and she'd grab, and I was like,
Oh no.
what?
No.
She said that's how, because she had her brother and her 2 cousins who lived with her, that's how they would wait to talk to her grandma.
Well, that's better than butting in.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But every time
It's
it's
just
like,
little-
You do that to a stranger, you could get your butt kicked.
I know, because you would just be like caught off guard. You don't know who it is. Like,
Yeah.
she would just grab like your forearm or like right here. That's weird. You can't do that. Someone's gonna smack you.
especially now.
If they don't pull a gun on you.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up in Texas?
I didn't. I grew up around the world. My father was in the military. We were at Fort Hood, Texas, which is Killeen, which is not too far from Waco.
Okay, yeah. Southeast Texas.
Yeah. And for my money, and I had kinfolk out in El Paso, so I'd seen plenty of West Texas.
Yeah, that's
One trip's enough.
like 2 weeks ago. I was over in Lubbock
Yeah.
for like 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and it was almost comparable to Michigan, of like how just lifeless people were out there because there's literally nothing. There's no water.
Yeah.
It's all heat.
I have a student that I met via my YouTube videos who is now a PhD, MD student in Lubbock. And he describes it about the same way.
Texas Tech is not it, man.
Yeah.
It is-
But East Texas, to me, was beautiful, just gorgeous. And then if you cross the state line into Louisiana, it's like you went into a third world country. The roads are small, not well maintained, very, very poor houses, et cetera, everywhere you drove. My mom's from over there. I'm sure she didn't mind getting out of there. All right, anything else? Well, again, thank you for making this an enjoyable term, at least until the last day. Okay? I'll see you next time. Bye.